Hello, how y'all doing? Y'all don't look nearly as intimidating as I thought. I thought I was going to get up here and be like shark bait, but I do appreciate y'all having me. It's a pleasure, obviously, to serve, and it's a pleasure to be here. But before I move on, I want to thank Shannon and Michelle for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak about our agency and things that we're doing with our agency. But I also want to take a moment to thank all of the employees of the Department of Public Safety. As mentioned, you know, we have over 2,600 employees, and everything that we've been going through as an agency, as a state, as a community, they've been right there. They've been coming in, whether it be the pandemic, whether it's been the weather events. They leave their families and they come out and they make sure that we provide the service that we're supposed to provide. And I'm so thankful to them. So I want to thank them for all of their service and their sacrifice. I want to thank our communities for our support. You know, as we go through it, we're all in this together. And that's one thing that you'll hear from me. We're all in it together. So regardless of what we go through, regardless of, you know, what happens in our community, it's incumbent upon us to do our best because we're all in it together. And as we do our individual best, then we all benefit from it. And that's kind of how I move throughout my life and my profession. So I'll kind of get into some of the things that we're dealing with as an agency, where we're going forward as an agency, and then I'll kind of open the floor up to for questions. One of the things that I really want to do is, if you would, just bear with me, is take a moment of silence in support of all of the victims of violent crimes. So if you would, just give me a moment of silence, please. Thank you. As you all may know, we recently lost a trooper to violent crimes. And in doing so, that rocked the core of our agency. But I will tell you this, it did not impact us one bit in the sense of our mission. It only strengthened our resolve to perform our mission and do so in a professional manner. It only brought us closer together, and not just as an agency, as a profession, but as a community, because the overwhelming support that we received as a result of that loss really brought us closer to our communities. And again, we've got to work as a community to get rid of the violent crime that's plaguing our communities. But that's vitally important. And, you know, when I look at, and when you look at what we do, as mentioned, I'm the Department of Public Safety. I'm State Police Superintendent, but I'm also serve as the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Public Safety. And it's important to note that, you know, when we talk about our public safety officials and our personnel, that's inclusive of Fire Marshal's Office, Highway Safety Commission. That's inclusive of Liquefied Petroleum Gas Commission, Oil Spill Coordinator's Office, and Office of Motor Vehicles. Those men and women come to work every day, and they do their very best to provide services so that our communities can continue to thrive and live and build. And I'm so proud of them. But that's a large area of responsibility. And most times when we talk about our personnel, most of you all, as I speak today, may be visualizing the men and women in uniform. But it's that support staff that carries us. There's no way we could do our jobs and perform our missions as successfully as we have without that support staff. So again, I submit to you, I'm very proud of what they do, and you'll hear that as I continue. So let's get to the meat of it. As I thought about, you know, what I would talk about today, I think it's evident that you all want to hear about what's going on in our agency. So I thought it'd be easy and it'd be best for everybody that I get right into the meat of what's going on. As you've seen, we've experienced, as I mentioned before, a lot of challenges throughout the year. Global pandemic, weather events that we've experienced, but we've also, as an agency, experienced significant challenges from within our agency. And at the heart of those challenges or reports of involving use of force. I'll tell you, that touched me personally, not only as agency head, but as a person. You know, whenever you hear where our personnel are not performing their duties in a professional manner, that's one thing. But whenever we're using excessive force, then that's impactful, and that impacts any and everybody in our communities. So for me, it's very, very important. It's vital that we put things into place to ensure that, you know, we do not have instances of excessive force in our agency or in our profession. And that's exactly what we're doing. So I'll kind of go over some of those things. And frankly, although some those incidents happened prior to my administration, I'm telling you right now, I am committed to making the changes necessary to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future or continue to happen. As I speak to you today, you're going to hear two themes: service and accountability. And the reason why that's important to me is because that is what has guided me throughout my career, not only here at State Police for nearly 26 years at DPS, but also throughout my 21 years in the military. And as I've gone through, whether it be trials and tribulations or challenges, is that service mentality and that devotion to accountability that have gotten the best results in all of those situations. And that's, frankly, the direction that we're moving with my agency and how we're going to continue to move and build within our agency. A couple things with that, you know, it's simple. It's my responsibility to, one, look at the issues that we have in our agency, whether it be past issues or present-day issues. Identify a plan to rectify those issues, and as we do, then put that plan into place to ensure that it doesn't continue and that we get the best out of our personnel. And that's exactly what we're committed to doing. And I say we because it's not just me. Since coming into this position, one of the initial things that I did was creating a leadership team that really looks at my vision of serving with compassion. You know, we do the patrol, we do the operational things very well. That's what we train on. The areas where we, and frankly, not just as a agency, but as a profession and as a society, that we can stand to improve upon is serving each other a little better. You know, as we serve each other individually, then what you'll find is not only are we better as individuals, we're better as a society. I mean, it seems simple, but it's not always evident in what we do. So I'm really focusing on serving with compassion, and that's the foundation for how we're moving forward as an agency. And what you should already be seeing is the amount of and type of service that we provide to our citizens. And I think I'll get into that a little later. So, but what it also does is it sets the foundation for our future generations. And while I'm speaking of that, I'm kind of excited because, you know, we've got our historic class 100 coming up this coming Sunday. 100th Academy in 85 years. Very proud of that because we now will have 64 men and women to assimilate into State Police family, into the Louisiana State Police family, DPS family, and our communities to further serve the mission of public safety. And I'm also proud of that class for another reason. It is one of the most diverse academies in the history of our agency. I think that's important to note because, you know, our society has become more diverse. It's become less monolithic and more diverse, and as we look at that, we definitely want to emulate our society, and that, as I see it, is value added. You know, when we look at diversity, and I do want to speak to that for a second, you know, oftentimes depending upon your thoughts of that matter or that topic, depending upon where you are, on which side of the aisle, may determine what your thoughts are thoughts are of diversity. And for me, diversity has always been value added. From the day of leaving and going into the military, being around someone that's different from me, that has a different history from me, that maybe look different or act different or think differently than me, has always been value added. It has always given me a different perspective. And upon getting a different perspective, it has opened my mind to, one, inclusion, but also the possibilities of what could be. And that's what diversity means to me. And that's what I'm building throughout our department. And as we begin and continue to build that mindset of being more diverse and it being value added, then you will see the benefits of it. And I think we will all see the benefits of it. So again, I'm very proud of that next academy coming up, because I think it's going to really help us. And beyond that, it's going to help us, you know, on the operational side. You know, currently we are approximately 200 troopers short. 200 troopers short. And while that within itself is significant, you know, the impact is really vital. You know, when we look at the rise in fatalities, the rise in serious injury crashes, you know, when you do not have and you do not see troopers on the road stopping those aggressive drivers, those distracted drivers, those impaired drivers, then that impacts safety for everybody, not just those that are impaired or distracted, but those that are doing what they're supposed to be doing, because they may ultimately come into contact with those impaired, distracted, or aggressive drivers. And that's not a good result. So it's very important to me to get our troopers and get more troopers on the road as quickly as possible. And that way we can save more lives. One of the areas, as I mentioned before, that has been of note has been our use of force. Recently, we put out our 2020 use of force statistics, which indicated that 67% of the use of force impacted or involved black or brown males. And I'll be the first to tell you, on the surface, as well as within, that's disturbing, okay? But I'm also here to tell you that, you know, we're working to determine the significance of that information. We want to delve into that information to see if that's actually it. You know, there are some variables that we're determining that may have impacted those numbers. And oftentimes when we look at it, you all see troopers on the side of the road. But when we look at events, whether it be as recently as the Bayou Classic, you know, we are being asked to move beyond our traditional roles in law enforcement and highway safety and move into our communities. And sometimes that involves us moving into communities that are impacted by violent crimes and so forth. And we don't choose who we come into contact with. We follow the evidence, we follow the information, we follow the intelligence, and from there we do our jobs. And we will continue to do our jobs to try and impact public safety. But it doesn't mean that we should not be taking a look at this information to determine if there is something that we can improve upon, and that's exactly what we're doing. You know, with that said, our troopers have encountered over 5.7 million motorists in the past decade, and that's dealing with traffic stops, arrests, and motorist assist. And of that 5.7 million motorists, we've only encountered use of force incidents at 0.52% of the time. That's less than 1%. That's significant. And while it is significant, I do realize that we do have some areas that we must continue to work on and continue to improve upon to ensure the safety of not only our personnel, but the safety of our citizens. So we continue to put in that work and do so. And I'll tell you this, the overwhelming majority of our DPS employees, phenomenal, professional, public servants. But, and there's always a but, we also have identified some personnel that have not acted in accordance with our, our guidelines, with our core values. And it's important that you all know that when we do encounter those employees, depending upon the significance of their behavior, then we will act accordingly. You know, we're going to do everything necessary to try and change any negative behavior that we encounter. And when that doesn't change, and you know, I use personally kind of like a 4-tier platform. You know, I come in as an agency head, I provide my vision, and I set the expectations. And that's exactly what we've done by saying, hey, we're going to perform our mission with professionalism and with compassion. Okay, so now I'm setting the foundation, I'm setting the vision, and I'm setting the expectations by which we're going to do our jobs and our duties and responsibilities. And as we do so, and we find that we have personnel that may not be acting in accordance or behaving in that manner, then what we're going to do is we're going to coach, train, mentor, and retrain. We're going to try to mentor those folks to change that negative behavior into positive. And then from there, we're going to continue to train and retrain as necessary. But when we find that they're now moving towards policy violations, then we're going to discipline them, plain and simple. And we're going to use a progressive discipline approach based upon the severity of the incident, based upon the severity of their behavior. Okay? And when that does not work, I submit to you that we will terminate and, if necessary, arrest. I think you've seen upon me coming into this department as agency head that I will take whatever necessary action to ensure that our people are performing as they should. And when they don't, then I'm going to hold them accountable. But you can likewise hold me accountable. So, you know, simply put, you know, the professionalism, the accountability, the proper treatment of our personnel is non-negotiable. I will not accept anything less than the best from our personnel. Now, with that said, we're going to give them everything that we're supposed to give them. We're going to give them the tools, we're going to give them the training, we're going to give them the resources. But we're going to also expect them to perform and behave as they should as professionals. And then we're going to let them do their jobs. So as you know, LSP moves forward as an agency. As I mentioned before, we're working through some of those staffing challenges. And not just the staffing challenges. When you're 200 short and you're continuously being asked to work other missions, it impacts some of our missions. And I'll give you kind of a comparison. You know, in 2020, during the Thanksgiving holiday period, we experienced 7 crashes that resulted in 8 fatalities. Okay? 1 year later, with 200, and not that we lost all of our 200 troopers in 1 year, but we did lose a large number. This particular year, we experienced 10 crashes, resulting in 16 fatalities. We put in, we ended up arresting 38 persons for DWI, driving while intoxicated. We administered 633 speeding citations. And a lot of those speeding citations are very, very high speeds. We're talking, you know, 100 plus, high 90s, okay? And the most troubling part for me is the use of seatbelts. We issued 96 seatbelt citations. Most of the fatalities that we responded to involved people that were not wearing their seatbelts. Something so simple as wearing your seatbelt can save your life, and yet we still have people that do not do it. So when we issue a ticket for a seatbelt violation or a speeding, it's not because we want to take money from you. It's because we want to save your lives. That's how important it is. And we're not just trying to save your life, we're trying to save everybody else's life on that highway. Now I'd like to kind of get into some of the other areas of my department where we've made some changes. As mentioned, you know, I've made some significant changes upon coming into this position. One of the initial changes I made was really changing the leadership. I thought it was important to bring on leaders that shared my vision, shared my direction, And as we did that, it was important to really take a look at all of our leadership in our department. I have some innovative, phenomenal leaders as part of my team, and I'm excited to work with them day in and day out. We're making some major changes here, but we've also made some significant gains in other areas, and one of those areas includes technology. As I mentioned before, one of the foundations to success for me has been accountability. And in the past, we have not had the technology to really hold our people accountable. We expected our supervisors to really go through a whole bunch of paperwork in order to hold their persons and their personnel accountable. Since that time, we've really looked at our technology. We've put in some major components to help our supervisors and to help our personnel, frankly. And one of those is our computer-aided dispatch. About 2 years ago, going on 3 years ago, I took over as the technology commander for our agency. And we're looking at implementing a computer-aided dispatch. And the computer-aided dispatch, for those that are not familiar with it, is basically a system that's utilized to, one, dispatch our personnel, but also record all of their activities as they are dispatched to certain events, all of their events. Well, we did not have a statewide computer-aided dispatch. We had systems that resided locally in each troop that did not communicate with all of the other systems. So if someone was doing something in New Orleans, they could not necessarily look to Monroe to get that information without having to pick up the phone, call, and ask the guy in Monroe, hey, can you look at this or look this up for me? That's ridiculous in this day and time. So we're blessed to be able to bring in a company to assist us and give us a statewide CAD system, or computer-aided dispatch system. And what that does for us is it increases our accountability tenfold by giving everyone access to that system, by putting in that information, and regardless of whether you're in Monroe, Shreveport, New Orleans, or Lafayette, you will have access to the same information once it's entered. Now, that helps us with regards to criminal activity and identifying and tracking criminal activity, but it also helps us with managing our employees. When we find that we have employees that are not acting in accordance, it gives us an easier or more succinct system to look into to be able to determine in a more expeditious manner whether or not they're performing their duties as they should, or whether or not we have concerns that we need to address. So it's very important to implement that CAD system. But we're not stopping there. We're bringing an e-citation system to our agency. Again, that will be a statewide system. You know, when we look at issuing a paper citation to someone, it takes 15 to 20 days for someone to be able to go back and pay their ticket and or move beyond that. With the e-citation system that we're looking to implement, we're looking at within 24 hours you being able to take care of your fine and move beyond that particular instance. But also gives us an opportunity to once again track our personnel's activity in a more efficient and expeditious manner. And the largest or other large component will be a statewide e-crash system that we're looking to implement. Again, all of these systems by themselves are a value add to our system and a force multiplier, but they will all talk to each other, which will give us, at a moment's notice, the ability to go in, press 1 or 2 buttons, and retrieve the necessary information and analytics that we need to follow trends, to follow crime, as well as to put forth a plan together to build upon that information. So I'm looking forward to, doing that. Our CAD system, we're on the final phases of deployment with that and implementing that. So I expect by the first or second quarter of the coming year to have that fully implemented. Our e-citation system, we're looking to identify vendors and get that system implemented. So probably the first or second quarter to actually start moving towards identifying a vendor to bring on board. And as far as our e-crash system, we have identified a vendor, and we're looking to start the implementation process by the second quarter of the coming year. Okay, and I think that will help us. And as I mentioned, the evolution of these systems will put our agency in a position to become paperless, but it will also increase our ability to communicate more effectively and increase our accountability at all levels. But that's not just where we're stopping. You know, there are several areas to make an agency great, and one of the main areas includes really the expectations of our employees, knowing what's expected of them, and we do that through our policies. We have made significant changes to our policies, and a lot of those policy changes have included police reform measures that we find that have been beneficial in reducing a lot of the incidents that we've experienced in the past. One of those includes duty to intervene. When you look at a lot of the situations throughout our nation with law enforcement, one of the main issues that agencies have been faced with is how to build that system of intervening, having your personnel intervene in situations where other officers or employees are not acting appropriately. And that's exactly what we've started looking at. So we have taken that head on. We have changed our policy, but we're also bringing on the training to supplement that policy change. It's not just about changing the policy, it's also about making sure that we're incorporating the proper and the best behavior among our employees. And in order to do that, we have to, one, tell them what's expected of them, and two, we have to provide them the proper training to show them what's expected of them. And three, we have to support them in those expectations. And that starts with me. So that's exactly what we're doing. We are bringing on that training to help ensure that they understand that they have the support of our administration, but they also have the tools necessary to intervene if they come across, whether it be one of our employees or another law enforcement professional that are not acting in accordance with state laws, policies, or just in best practices. And as we do that, I think, again, we will, as a profession and as communities, see a decline in a lot of the excessive force incidents that we've seen across the nation. We've also enhanced and changed our body-worn camera policy. You know, I was a member of the team that brought body-worn cameras to our agency. And I will tell you, upon doing so, it was not readily received initially. I don't mind saying that. You know, most people thought it was someone spying on them. They didn't see it as a protection for the officer and the citizens, and that's exactly what it is. But once they gain an understanding, once they saw the proof in the pudding, they realized that, you know, sometimes we have some citizens who may think that, hey, if I say this, then it may get me out this ticket. Then we were able to, as opposed to initiating an investigation, all we had to do is go take a look at the body-worn camera and say, it did or did not happen. If it did happen and it's wrong, then we need to deal with it and deal with our employee. But likewise, if it did not happen, then we can clear our employee, they can go back to work doing their job, and they don't have to worry about anything. And that's what we want. So that's another benefit to all of the technology that we're bringing. And I think, again, as it becomes widely accepted, you will see not only as in our agency the acceptance increase, but also in our profession. Oftentimes it's just an understanding of what is expected of our officers. Okay, but we have made some changes in our body-worn camera, and I'll speak to some of those. One of them mandates that our officers ensure that their body-worn cameras are turned on whenever they go on duty. And this is our patrol. We do not have, and I'll answer that up front, we do not have body-worn cameras issued to every trooper. Frankly, it's a significant cost. And when we look at some of our troopers have what we call sedentary or static duties, more administrative duties, they are not really working with the public on a daily basis directly. So to incur that cost, and that means, well, increase in possible taxes and so forth to try and pay for that. So we want to be judicious about how we spend our funding and our money. One of the other areas that we made changes in that policy is mandating the transportation of prisoners be recorded at all times, unless they're in areas which prohibit that, such as hospitals and such. Mandates the recording of travel to pursuits or known use and force encounters. We've also outlined the procedures for supervisory quarterly reviews. As I mentioned before, one of the major issues that we've had is accountability. And as we move towards building more accountability in our agency, I've mandated that, and I've held all of our supervisors accountable. You know, I find it difficult to go and only deal with a trooper or deal with an officer when they do something wrong. I want to look at that supervisor. I want to look and see what have they done to curb or change that behavior. Is it a first time? If it's a second time, then what was done the first time? And was it necessary or was it significant? And did it change the behavior? Okay? And that is important to me because I'm not there with all of our troopers on a daily basis, but that supervisor is. So it's important that they understand that they have a significant role in ensuring that our troopers are doing things safely, but also as according to our policies. So I've really focused in on supervisory accountability, not just trooper accountability, but supervisory accountability. And as you see the change in them and you see that growth in those supervisors, then you will see the change in behavior from negative to positive in our troopers. But I will tell you, sometimes you just have a trooper that just does not do what they're supposed to do, and that's when the discipline comes into play, and we'll do what we need to do. So, again, that policy is important, though. You know, initially, one of the areas of that particular policy that concerned me surrounded supervisory review of the body-worn camera of their personnel. And one word in the past or older policy which said that our supervisors shall review their body-worn camera, their personnel's body-worn camera periodically. Well, that to me, when you look at periodically, when is that? How can you measure that? How can you hold accountable, a supervisor accountable to periodically? Because that can be once a year, okay? As long as it's consistently once a year. So, you know, we've looked at what we can accomplish, and we've now mandated that our supervisors review their personnel's body-worn cameras, at least 4 of their personnel every quarter, okay? Not just body-worn camera, but in-car camera. And I think what that does is, one, it sets an expectation of our personnel that your supervisors will be looking at your activities, not just body-worn camera, your use of force reports, all your other reports, but they will be looking at it, okay? And 2, it sets the expectation of supervisory accountability within our supervisors, that you have a job to do. And it's incumbent upon you to do your job so that we're not having to terminate employees or arrest employees. We can reach them before it gets to that point. And we spend a lot of money training our employees. We do not want to terminate or arrest any of them. You know, we want to keep them, if at all possible. But when we find we can't, then we will remove them. Another area of contention was our use of force policy. As I mentioned before, you know, that's one of the areas that I really took a deep dive at, looking at those policies. And what we've done with this particular policy is basically looked at it in depth and made some significant changes. One, defining chokeholds, positional asphyxia, retaliatory force, and de-escalation. And as we define that, then it gives our employees an idea of what's expected of them. But we've also expanded the policy to include a ban on chokeholds, a ban on the use of force impact weapons to the head or neck, unless deadly force is justified, and a mandate that all of our troopers and DPS officers carry a less than lethal weapon. This is important because, you know, when we come up on certain situations, and if the only thing that you have is your gun, then that puts everybody in an adversarial situation, regardless of how significant the situation is. We understand that that's a tool, but we have other tools, less than lethal force tools, that can accomplish the job the majority of the time. So we've mandated that they carry those less than lethal tools and weapons. And by doing that, I believe that we will definitely get the best outcome of even an adversarial situation. If you're using a taser as opposed to a sidearm, then you achieve a better outcome. Nobody loses their life. They may feel a little pain, They may go to jail, but they're alive. Okay, so that was very important to make that change. We've also mandated that troopers and DPS officers carry their taser in a Class A and Class B uniform. And we've made some other changes, such as mandating that administrative leave be administered when deadly force is used. And I think it's important there because oftentimes what people do not realize whenever we use force, especially deadly force, when someone loses their life at the hands of one of our personnel, it impacts our people. It impacts them mentally. It impacts them emotionally. Oftentimes when we go out there and we perform our jobs, when you look at what's required of our personnel, you go out to a crash scene, you see a 6-month-old baby that may have just died as a result of a crash, and now you take this trooper, they work that crash, and they may have a 6-month-old at home. They may have a 2-year-old at home, but they have to work that crash. And as they work that crash, then we expect them to leave that crash and go and work another crash where there may be another fatality. They see some of the most traumatic parts of our society of any profession, them along with firemen and, of course, medical professionals. And that's a lot to deal with. So I've mandated that whenever use of force is used that results in the loss of life, then they're going to take some time. They're going to get some peer support counseling, and they'll get a chance to breathe before bringing them back to face the job that we expect of them. Okay? But beyond that, we've also made some other changes in our policy with the change in our pursuit policy. We've updated and outlined the provisions of ramming, which now prohibits ramming unless the authorization of deadly force is necessary. Some of the other areas that I thought was important for us to change included training. One of the areas I've changed was mandating that implicit bias training for all personnel be included. And that's top to bottom. That's inclusive of me on down. I thought that was important because, you know, when we look at implicit bias, oftentimes most people don't realize that they look upon other people based upon their own lenses, based upon their environment, based upon where they come from. Again, we talk about that diversity, that difference that we look at people with. And sometimes it's not always a positive thing. Sometimes it is. But it's important for us, especially as a profession that comes across all different cultures, that we understand our implicit biases. And as we do so, then we're better able to deal with those adverse situations by which we have to deal with people, understanding, well, this may be how I feel. Now I can take that information, I can use it when necessary to benefit that situation so that I can reach the best possible outcome. By understanding that I may look at someone a certain way, it causes me to draw attention and say, hey, back up, slow down. Okay, now I need to look at this. And likewise, if I am now on scene with multiple law enforcement professionals, and I now understand and I have the support of my administration, and I see someone acting in that manner, I can go put my hands on their shoulder and say, hold on, let me take this particular incident. I'll handle that. You take a breather, okay? I see you getting upset. Because oftentimes, when people get upset, a lot of it is based upon miscommunication, a lot of it is based upon culture and things that really you don't understand, or you may not necessarily understand that particular culture. So by instituting these training mechanisms, we can train our personnel to better handle these particular situations. So as I mentioned before, we've made some significant gains, we've made some significant changes, but that doesn't mean that our job is done. We have more work to be done, and we're committed to continuing that work. So again, I want to thank you for having me here. I want to thank all of our employees for the work that they do day in and day out. And I will open it up for questions. Yes, sir.
Colonel Davis, at Sound Off, Louisiana, we've got a number of instances where we've received concerns about the Air Support Unit of State Police. They have asserted that there's reckless disregard for safety, for maintenance, and they also have asserted that the unit is basically running an in-house flight school, which they contend is contrary to LSP's mission for air support. With the recent revelation that Joseph Dessens, the most recent pilot who was hired, had only had his solo flight certification for 19 days before he crashed the helicopter on October the 6th. Can you reassure NTSB officials and also those who are transported by LSP's air support that those operations are in fact sound and don't pose an elevated risk to their safety?
Well, here's what I can tell you. I have the utmost confidence in our flight personnel. And the reason why that's important to me is because they fly me. There's no more important reason than to have their confidence than to my personal safety. But yes, I can assure you of that. And let me speak to the training. You know, I've spent 21 years in the military. I've flown, and a lot of those missions that I've flown have been training missions. Our people do train. They have to train in order to remain proficient. So I expect them to train in the aircraft in which they fly. They will be doing so. But likewise, when you come out of any specific training, whether it be our State Police Academy, that does not, it certifies you that you've completed our course, but it doesn't mean that you are a subject matter expert in what you're performing. So like our troopers that come out the academy, that go through our driver's training, well, they may have a crash the next day, but it doesn't mean that they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So I have the utmost confidence in our air support team. They're phenomenal people and phenomenal pilots.
Thank you, Colonel.
Yes, sir.
Is there a process of, if you find any troopers specifically using excessive force, what you do with that? Do you put them into a training or some leave? What are you doing to handle that?
So for me, it's several things that I look at. One, I want to determine what the origin is, okay? Do they have problems? Do they have issues? Is there something else that's systemic that I may not know about? So I want to look at the mental and emotional health of that trooper. Two, we do have policies that stipulate what we're going to do. And if they violate the policy, then they're going to be investigated. And based upon what we determine in that investigation will determine the outcome of their sustainment. If they're to be disciplined and or terminated, then that's what we're going to do. If they violate those policies and or laws that results in their need to be arrested, then we're going to arrest them. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier about systems being put in place, technology systems being put in place so that when an event is occurring, let's say in New Orleans, and they can go, the troopers will be able to go to a database and be able to communicate maybe with someone in Monroe, so we're more real time than this possible document latency issue that can occur where information isn't readily available because it's sitting on multiple databases or no data, possibly even no database. Are budgets established already to take these maybe conversations that are being put in place and vendors that have been identified to actually being able to implement these programs?
Yes, sir. I'm basically, I'm building it out of my own budget. So I think it's very important for us to do. And wherever I find the availability, then I'm doing it. But the technologies that I've spoken of, the CAD RMS, already built into the budget. E-citation, built into the budget. E-crash, we're going to build into the budget. We're going to get it done. It's that important. Yes, sir.
Well, apparently everybody's very pleased with what you've done, and I am just wondering if you have any political aspirations.
Oh, no, sir. I'm a servant. You know, before I even knew what that meant, I was coaching kids. I just grew up. I believe that we're all better for giving to others, and that's simply who I am. I have no political aspirations at all. I just want to help people. Yes, sir.
Where do you think your agency has made the most progress
technology. As I mentioned before, you know, in 2017, I think it was in 2017, the Office of Technology Services, which manages all of our large-scale technologies, based upon the legislative requests, performed research to determine where we had gaps. And my agency served as 1/3 of the entire state's most efficient area of technology. That's prior to body-worn cameras, e-citation. When I came in 2018 to look for that computer-aided dispatch, that CAD, to show you how outdated we were, in 2018, when I started working to implement that system, we were only one of 4 state police highway patrol agencies in the nation that did not have a CAD system. One of 4 out of all of the state police agencies across the nation. And we were the only one to have never had one or implemented one. So I feel very proud of the work that we've done. We've made some significant gains. We continue to make significant gains, and you all will see the results, not just in accountability, but in the output and being able to be more efficient. And that helps our entire state. Yes, ma'am.
You talked previously about having an outside consultant to come in and sort of do a top-down look at some of the policies and practices in the agency. Have you found that consultant yet? And if so, can you talk about who it is and what the status of that work is?
So we are not there at the point to where we have signed a contract, but we have consulted with multiple nationally recognized companies, and we are narrowing that down. I do expect probably within the first quarter to be moving on a contract so that we can get that done. That we are moving towards getting that done. That's very important that we do that, because you really can't fix what you don't know. So it's important for us to identify those gaps, identify those issues, and have it done objectively. And as we do so, then we'll work to resolve those and get those fixed.
And you said the first quarter is when you're targeting hiring someone?
That's when we're looking at it. We're hoping to get that
One more
contract signed.
question.
Yes, sir.
Back in August, it was reported that state police is not tracking vaccination rates for troopers. If that's still the case, can you explain why?
Well, that's a voluntary, actually, that's voluntary. So if we take a look at our troopers to determine, we ask them who would volunteer that information. We're not at a point where we can mandate that information. But what we can do is we ask. And we do ask to give us a consensus as to whether or not we have a problem. What I will tell you is right now, I think we've been averaging about 1 to 2 positives. And when you look at an agency of our size, again, that's very small as compared to some of the other agencies.
Positives a day?
Well, just on a daily basis. So obviously, once you become positive, then that may run for a week or 2. So when you're averaging 1 to 2 per day for an agency of our size, you know, while I wish it was 0 and consistently 0, I'm glad that it's not higher.
All right, Colonel Davis, thank you so much.
Thank you all.